What if we could redesign everything? Welcome to the DIF, the world's largest online festival of ideas, 3 weeks of films, podcasts, and live conversations, much like this one. Today, we're going to be talking about the circular economy and human development. We're going to combine the world of materials and economics of the circular economy with the world of social science and development studies of human development. How do these two concepts or ideas link, or how might they link? And how may they, when you combine them, how might they produce or bring to light solutions that help us move towards the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals for 2030? And to talk about this today, I'm joined by two speakers: Patrick Schroeder, Research Fellow at the International Development Studies at the University of Sussex, and Alex Lemille, who's an author on this topic. He's got a concept something called Circular Economy 2.0 and co-founder of the African Circular Economy Network. But before I get to them, I really want to encourage you to join this conversation. It's an interactive session. We want your comments. We want your questions. We want you to challenge our speakers as much as possible in these next 45 minutes. And you can do that a number of ways. You can use the comments and questions feature that's embedded on our website. You can also use the same feature on YouTube if you've navigated your way to the YouTube stream. And you can also do it by tweeting us using #ThinkDiff. But to get us started, I wonder if I could go to you, Patrick. Could you tell me what are the links, or what should the links maybe be, between the circular economy and human development?
Okay, yes. Thanks for the introduction, Seb, and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining our session. So I'm based here at the Institute of Development Studies, IDS, the University of Sussex, and we're looking at the circular economy from the development studies context or angle. And that means several things. First of all, maybe we're interested very much in what the circular economy looks like in the so-called global south and developing countries. And we've started this work last year, for example, with a large conference we organized here at IDS, where we explored the links between circular economy, sustainable livelihoods and lifestyles. And then, as Seb, you already mentioned, now the large framework for global development are the Sustainable Development Goals. And
just quickly on that, Patrick, just in case there's anyone who doesn't know, could you give us like the 5 to 10 seconds? What are the SDGs? I realize I used the term as well.
Yes, the SDGs were they were agreed in 2015 by all countries at the UN, and so there's 17 of these goals with a subset of 169 targets, and they cover all the 3 dimensions: social, economic, and environment. And the timeline is up to 2030. And so now there's big momentum among governments, but also among big businesses, NGOs, using the SDGs as a framework to understand what they're doing and which boxes they can tick, how it links to the work they have done, to identify blind spots, maybe some of the work they're doing which might not link directly to SDGs, or what else they could do. And so what I've done, trying to look at the circular economy also through the SDG lens, to see what can the circular economy and the various practices of the circular economy do to achieve the SDGs. And so what I found out, that the circular economy are very important to make contributions to a number of the environmental targets. For example, life on land, life below water, also sustainable consumption and production. And also it's important for a number of the economic SDGs, for example, sustainable economic growth, clean industrialization, these parts. So the circular economy is highly relevant for these goals and the various targets underneath there. However, we also found out that the circular economy probably doesn't deliver yet on a number of the social SDGs, for example, inequality. or gender issues. So these are some of the gaps in the current circular economy practices as well as in the discourse. And this has also been identified, for example, by a recent literature review looking at over 600 academic papers which have been published on the circular economy, and only a handful of them really went into the details on the social issue. So this DIF session on people in the circular economy this year is very relevant.
Yeah, and maybe if I can add to that, there's been a recent research by NASA that has been resurfaced with the IPCC report in last September, and that NASA-funded research was it's called the HANDY model. Has found out and has confirmed that there might be a collapse of the systems and the human systems for two main reasons. Social inequalities and resource mismanagement. So we address resource mismanagement in circular economy. So circular economy is a tool to get us to the safe space for humanity. What might be missing in circular businesses and way to approach circular economy might be the sense of making sure this next economic model, which is considered by many to be the next one. What's missing is to ensure that it embeds inequality among its principles, so that we make sure that in an economy of service where you don't need to buy goods, maybe you can ensure that those services address the needs of the people first, using circularity, material circularity as a mean, so that we address this issue of inequality that has been highlighted by NESA.
So the sort of thing that this sort of sparks this conversation, just to check that I understand rightly, is we could create what we consider to be a circular economy right now, what the dominant literature talks about right now, which is material flows and the system around our products, goods and services. But actually one of the major threats to society and inequalities of society, highlighted by at least highlighted by the IPCC report, would just be completely unaddressed.
Well, circular economy, the resource mismanagement is the core of how we could create a collaborative and distributed world, networked economy. But in the sense of the distributive approach should include social relations and the relation between all kinds of people, so that distributive means renewable energy are accessible to anyone. It doesn't have to be centralized as we do manage energy today. So how can we also look at distributive nature of social relations and the human interactions between themselves, so that we make sure that those services and that distributed economy grants access to the people that are not embedded in our economic system yet. Remember that economy is just a tool. Economy is just a tool to make sure that we create well-being for humans on this planet. So we tend to forget that, because economy took over social needs in our recent years, but now we need to recover that balance.
Yeah, that point was made at in the launch party by Ken Webster, was that the economy is not a force of nature that we have no agency over. It's actually something that's designed for us. But actually, what I like about what you said, Alex, there is you're framing it as an opportunity, right? So when we rethink our modes of production, we rethink our connection to our designs and materials and the way in which we create things and resource management, it actually opens up this opportunity to do something very differently from a social dynamic.
Yeah, definitely. And when you evolve in an economy where resources are scarce and needs to be managed carefully, maybe it's interesting to look at other dynamic stocks of resources that could be where we could rethink the roles of this stock, and we will talk about it later. Yeah.
And where's this conversation now, Patrick? I understand that you had your conference. Where have we got to in terms of trying to link these two ideas?
Right. Yes. Now, within the international development context, there is a well-established framework, which is the human development approach, which looks specifically at needs and capabilities of people. Just to give a background, so you might the human development approach was conceptualized by Amartya Sen, who also published on this, and subsequently the UNDP started launching their human development reports beginning in 1990. So, and interesting is also that Amartya Sen, he started developing these ideas around human development in the 70s and 80s, rising from his kind of dissatisfaction with the economic paradigm which was promoted through international development. And there's, I mean, in terms of time, there's a bit of a link here to also the circular economy, where maybe in the 70s, 80s, the initial thinkers about the circular economy also started thinking about arising maybe from their dissatisfaction with the current linear system. So, and now what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring these two together. I might just go to the slide here that I have. To turn on the screen share. So if you could see this slide,
yeah, we can see that.
Yeah, great. So, for example, within the human development reports, they use a number of indicators and metrics to assess and how far countries and societies make progress on human development. So they use indicators or objectives like achieving long and healthy lives, access to knowledge, and decent standards of living. And so they look at life expectancy, educational attainments, schooling, capital GNI. And so now, and this is still work in progress. So we're trying now to understand, and it could be helpful for the circular economy. So how can the circular economy, as it's developing now, contribute to achieving these goals? So these are, in a way, this is the missing social dimension of the circular economy. And we think it's you bringing this together with the human development framework, which is a well-established approach that's been tested and is being used, together with the circular economy as now the main emerging model for, on the one hand, business innovation, but also in terms of a new possible sustainability paradigm. So I think that could be a very powerful framework.
So what are we actually looking at on this particular diagram? Is the circle at the top, it's the circular economy operating with a new set of principles and feeding into these objectives? So is that what it's illustrating?
It's the three main indicators among the Human Development Index, which was developed by Amartya Sen and Mr. Elhaj. And these three indicators have since for the past decades they've tried to explain and to show another way of measuring well-being away from just GDP as an indicator. So taking into account life expectancy at birth, educational attainments, means of years of schoolings, and per capita GNI. So the idea here is to move the debate from an economic-centric way of measuring progress into a human development index based on these three indicators. And then maybe to make the link here with circular economy from my viewpoint is that long and healthy life, I mean, circular economy embeds in its core notion the concept of biomimicry, and Ken Webster reminded us not so long ago that biomimicry is a big chunk of the circular thinking. So it links up to life. So obviously it's a great tool to reach out to this long and healthy life, because there is no other choice. Access to knowledge, I would refer to Professor Walter Stael, who is explaining that the knowledge capital is the most important of all knowledge. So if you don't educate the next generation of decision makers, if you don't educate the current decision makers, and if you don't preserve that stock of knowledge, we might not find the right solutions and might not decide properly. So knowledge in circular economy is one of the most important stock after capital, the natural capital stock. And then decent living standards, well, here we measure it on income, but maybe in a circular economy, we move away from the scarcity of having just one way of exchange between individuals, which is the currencies, into virtual currencies, local currencies, new way of exchange like barter and reciprocity and householding. So we move away from, we create these resilient communities that we will talk in the next slide.
Actually, there's a podcast just released today with Ken Webster interviewing Michelle Bowens from the Peer-to-Peer Foundation. And in that podcast, Michelle Bowens quite explicitly says that he's saying we need to move from an economy that is based on extracting value from finite resources to an economy that's built around infinite resources, specifically knowledge, which I think really links to what you were just saying, Alex.
Yeah.
Maybe just one question that's come in that I think is kind of relevant just to feed in right now from Joe is why is the circular, and especially since you've just sort of highlighted some of the really clear links, why is the circular economy struggling to address social issues today?
Well,
okay, you go first.
Just a quick word, and then I let Patrick say something. In a linear economy of scarcities, there is not only scarcities in the environmental dimension and in the economic dimension that we've seen with the last financial crisis, but because of concentration of power, your linear economy works like a pyramid where you have an imbalance in powers, and these are acknowledgeable in all three dimensions. So in a linear economy of scarcities, we need to make it to be as efficient as possible, and efficiency means people might be we might need less people because we want things to be so efficient that we will replace people in factories instead of looking at them from a different angle. Whereas in a circular economy where we look at valuing all the stocks, maybe there is a third stock, the stock of people, that may be very useful when we need to repair, maintain technical nutrient that might disappear or might be undervalued. So we would need available energy to fix those undervalued elements in our economies, and also we would need those people maybe to fix the destruction that we've started with. Well, we've started, it's been a long way already with our biosphere. So how can we look at this stock of people in another angle and start valuing it, because the other stocks are either disappearing or needs to be maintained somehow.
In terms of some very practical examples in how the circular economy can address the social issues, again from the development perspective. That's often mentioned for informal waste picking, for example, which is prevalent in most developing countries. There are millions of people who are actually already doing circular economy work. However, they're often, in most cases, marginalized, working in very poor conditions. And so these are opportunities within the circular economy to address these social issues of discrimination and inequality on a practical level. Then another issue that I've come across very recently, where the trends and within circular practices of textile manufacturing, where there's and we've discussed this before, is that the trend towards automation, on-demand manufacturing, reshoring of production. This has potentially very negative impacts on, for example, countries in Southeast Asia, which depend on the manufacturing of textiles, and it's especially women who are working. And for many women, this is the first or only opportunity in terms of employment. And here's again, if we bring in the human development lens as well as the SDG lens, which has the emphasis also on inequality and gender. So this more comprehensive framework helps to address these existing as well as emerging social issues.
You've got a couple more diagrams you want to show us.
Yes, I do. Let's move to the next one, which should not be totally unfamiliar. So in a way, this is a combination of various things. So we took the butterfly diagram from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and some of the work that Alex done before on the human sphere. But so we try to put these, if we put these human development objectives at the center. So, I mean, within the material flows of the circular economy, there's the different cascades of the loops. And we try to, and Amartya Sen, for example, the human development is about strengthening capabilities of people. So, and as well as enlarging choices for people. So they are in a way these cascades of various capabilities which can be enhanced. And so within the human sphere, it includes obviously people, but also these other sets of government and policy, then which is, we have this here at the outer, the circle, then the business sphere, but also the community elements, and then the individual level. And there's different measures and initiatives which can be taken on each of these levels to contribute towards those human development objectives.
Yeah, in fact, the way you should read that graph is, how do we reinforce the macroeconomic policy framework from the outer circle? So here we recognize that the economy should be distributive, renewable energy, and all these elements should be accessed to all human beings within a planet or within a country. So the outer loop is the distributive approach of the economy. The next loop is on top of being circular, business model should be inclusive. The next loop within it is about reinforcing communities. So we are here about building resilient communities, and all these loops will lead to individual well-being according to the Human Development Objectives, i.e. cascading and self-reinforcing loops to strengthen capabilities and choices.
We've got a few questions coming in,
Okay.
so I'm quite keen to work through the diagrams you've got and get back to the conversation. So if there's a couple more things you just want to set the scene with, or perhaps
do you want to? We've got one slide here that Alex is going to speak on.
Yeah, one last maybe ideas about before we move into a conversation mode is that from a biomimicry point of view, we learn that every element and every living beings in nature, in natural ecosystems, have a function to play or a role, and all these elements and living beings in nature, in natural ecosystems, they self-reinforce each other to maintain that ecosystem and to maintain life. And from that principles, When you look at, I mean, circular economy, we look at the world from two dimensions. We look at the world from a stock management perspective, and we look at the world from a flow of energies perspective. And we need to grasp both, and we need to maintain quantity and quality of both so that we maintain life on Earth. And that's what we learn with circular economy. But if you apply this circular thinking, I personally see a third stock, a stock of humans. And when I look at the biosphere stock, I see a disappearing stock that we've been destroying so far, and we need to change our way of behaving towards that stock. And when I look at the technical stock, I see a stock that needs to be maintained and valued, which is not what we've done so far. The only dynamic stock that I see on our beautiful planet is the human stock. We are growing. We are moving from 7.5 billion to 10 plus billion people. So if we look at it's a matter of perspective, but if we turn the question around, is it scary, or can we take advantage of that stock in new innovative way? I'm not saying we need to go back to the old good days. I'm saying, can we look at the stock of human as a dynamic, abundant stock of resources that could help us rebuild the biosphere? Can we look at the flows and the energies coming from that stock of dynamic stock of human? When we sleep and we eat, we are renewable energy. Maybe we can fix those forests around us. Maybe we can recreate large landscapes like John Liu is doing, this permaculture expert from America and China. And he's proven that we can rebuild large landscapes. So maybe by considering the stock and energy coming from that human sphere, we could change our behavior and adapt ourselves to the biosphere instead of destroying it. That's one of the 4 strategies that are highlighted here in brown. The strategy of adaptation, how the human sphere will adapt to the biosphere. It could be by replacing environmental functions. I usually take the example of the Chinese ladies, because there's missing bees in Sichuan region, so they are hand pollinating the trees. Otherwise, they won't have fruits in the next season. So I'm not saying humans should do that everywhere, but when the environmental functions are missing, until such time the bees population come back, maybe humans can replace those functions and we can rebuild that ecosystem. And that's one strategy. The other strategy is the feedback loop from the biosphere. It's the evolution strategy. Can we learn from our ecosystems and adapt our behavior towards that ecosystem? And for that, we need to consider ourselves nature. We need to be connected to the nature so that we rebuild the biosphere instead of destroying it. The last 2 strategies are the valorization strategy. We are renewable energy, so we need to be prioritized because we are available stock. We are there, available at low temperature. Whether we find innovative way to utilize or to use us in an innovative way, this is up to us. But the stock is there, it's available to fix materials. So maybe we should prioritize that stock and drop taxes on that stock and start taxing what's coming scarce in our economy. And then the last one is advancement, whereby we will measure well-being. It's very connected to human development, whereby we will measure the advances towards well-being of people. We will measure the level of adaptation of the humans within their biosphere, and the level of valorization of human as energy within the technosphere.
Okay, right. If you guys return, yes, we've got the audience is brimming with questions for you after that.
We can see them.
The provocation, and we're going to do them in quick fire fashion over the next 15 minutes. I had one question myself though, and as the host, sorry everyone watching, I do get priority, because I think what's interesting about what you've done is you've shown it with diagrams, and one person we've had speak in the DIF a couple times before who's a big fan of diagrams and talks about how important they are as communication devices is Kate Rayworth with her donut economic model. And I wondered well, firstly, whether you two are familiar with Kate's work and the donut economics, which I sort of assume you may have heard of in some way. How does that link into what you guys are talking about and showing with your visuals?
It's the donut is the end goal. The donut is where we need to be in that safe and just space for humanity. Okay, the donut is takes on the circular economy principles because it recognizes the distributive nature of how our system should work and how regenerative and restorative our system should work in an agnostic, cross agnostic approach. So the donut is where we need to go. Circular economy is your toolbox to reach out to the donut. But the circular economy so far addresses the safe space for humanity. If from the work from Patrick in human development and linking it with circular economy, and from my suggestion of considering the stock of humans and the flows of humans as also something we could be innovative from, then we insert equality into that on top of circularity, and therefore this concept becomes your toolbox to reach out to this just space for humanity at the same time, and at the same time addresses more SDGs indicators. Remember that linear circular economy is not embedded in SDGs. So circular economy, human development, and the link with the human sphere could become that tool to reach out to that safe and just space for humanity faster.
With just to play devil's advocate, perhaps, are humans really stocks and flows in the same way the materials are?
Not in the same way.
No, it's not in the same way. It's from a natural ecosystem perspective, we are nature. And we tend to forget that because out of 24 hours per day, I believe we walk on concrete 23 hours. So we tend to forget the connection with nature. And you read the biomimicry expert, sorry, I forgot her name just now.
Janine Benyus?
Janine Benyus, and we have no choice but to reconnect with nature and to consider ourselves nature. So from a natural perspective, we are an abundant stock of resources, living beings, and flows of energies. Now it's a matter of valuing that stock, not from an economic point of view, but from saying we need to actively rebuild the biosphere. I mean, there are some, what comes to mind is the interesting sanitation solutions that we see. I mean, nitrates, phosphates circulate in our circular systems, and we are circular systems ourselves. So if you don't reconnect the humans to the circularity of our planet, you are missing an important stock of resource and flows of energy. And the concept behind that is to say, do we go full speed into a robot-based economy, which adds more pressure on resources which are already missing in a world of 7.5 billion? Is that the right move? Or do we come up with a balanced approach whereby we would say maybe we need a bit more human energy because it's abundant, it's endless, and it's available. So can we come up with a balanced approach instead of just go for robots only? That's the question I'm asking. I don't have necessarily a specific answer to that.
I mean, this is where the human development aspect actually also is relevant. It's about do we increase human capabilities or do we restrict human capabilities and choices? So if this can be also used as one of the guiding principles, I think that would be very helpful.
Yeah, and another thing to say, just quickly, Seba, is that then you have three stocks. You have the biosphere, the human sphere, and the technosphere. Then, according to your country's priorities, you balance your project according to those three stocks. You don't need to use all the stocks at the same time for any circular project. But now you have the choice. You have a better choice, and maybe you come up with more balanced decisions. Remember that stock of human is effective. It's an effective choice because it's there, it's available.
So we have a question from Justice on the webpage, and they ask, agreeing with the principles of CE 2.0, not being aligned with the current corporate strategies, I have a two-part question. How can this discrepancy be managed? Is it regulation? Is it finance? Is it international bodies? And then second part to that is, how does this play into what's actually happening in the world today? The rise of populism, is that making international cooperation more difficult? And are there any new key players? So actually it's a three-part question, Justice. You didn't give us that. So it's number one is, the discrepancy between the big strategies of today. How is that managed? Is it regulation? Is it financial incentives? Number two, how does this play out in the big picture of what's happening in the world with we're very familiar with the news headlines that we see every day. And number three, are there any new key players emerging that are particularly exciting in terms of being pioneers of this approach?
Well, maybe I just start from the third one. And this is...
sorry, Patrick, just your audio there for a minute sounded like, I don't know if it's because Alex was talking about robots and wanting to take over, but it's gone a little bit robotic. Can you just...
I'll come a little closer to the mic. Maybe that's more helpful. So I'll start with the third question. Yes, there are many new players moving into the space, and we conceptually, and this links actually also to a lot of the work that's happened in the climate and low carbon development space. There's one of the strategies is to build transformative alliances, what we call them. So to drive the change cannot be done by one single actor, but it needs to be, as I said, like alliances which are driving the change, and that's maybe also linked to this next question of nationalism, which I being an immigrant myself, I'm watching this with great concern, and it's definitely impacting the ability for countries to cooperate on these very large issues.
Patrick, sorry, just to interrupt you. I think there's something's definitely gone wrong with the microphone. I'm not sure what it is. I was just wondering if we might try unplugging the microphone and just relying on your inbuilt device just for the last few minutes of Q&A, just so the audience can hear you nice and clearly. You might just have to be wary of feedback, but I'll mute myself so that we can hear your response clearly. Sorry to interrupt you. Yes, you were just saying how you were talking about the second part of that question.
Okay, so we switch to the other microphone now.
That's much better, thank you.
Much better, okay, great, thanks. This question on international cooperation. One example is possibly marine plastics pollution here. So there are increasingly also discussions that we might need a global treaty to deal with marine plastics pollution comparative to something like the Climate Change Framework Convention. But in the current political climate, this would be very difficult to achieve.
But remember, we are in a disruptive innovation festival. So the idea is to say, can we think differently? Yes, we are in a situation today where, as you said, they are very questionable news every day. But we are here to say all ideas are not always good to. But we can debate them, and we can try to think differently and develop different perspectives of how the economy should look like tomorrow. And remember that the next generation of millenniums sees the world completely differently from you and me and Patrick. So we are here to debate the current system and says maybe there are other ways to do things differently, and that's why we are here today.
A really interesting question in from Carlos from Social Growing in Chile, and he's actually delivering a DIF on Air session later next week on the 15th of November at 1600 GMT, 4 p.m. GMT. And he asks, is there a potential to disrupt the macro picture, this big picture economics, with the micro? Can you start with microeconomic policies as a way to disrupt a macroeconomic project?
Yeah, you can start. I mean, it's going to be addressed at macro and micro level. So you can start. I mean, you always know that it's impossible until you try, and all of a sudden you realize that it's so simple. I was discussing this morning about the 5p tax, on plastic bag in the UK that changed the behavior of UK citizens with plastic bags. So the minute you introduce a new element in the systems, it leads to behavior change, and whether you address it at micro level or macro level, both ways will lead to this new balance that we need to find in that just and safe space. You want to say something?
Yes, I mean, yeah, I agree. The micro level can achieve changes and disrupt the macro level, but it depends on maybe a couple of things. The number of micro initiatives that there are. So there needs to be multiple forms of these, and there need to be also the second aspect. They need to be possibly connected with each other to achieve this impact.
Whenever I think about the macro, I mean, I suppose someone would, listening to this conversation we've had this morning or this afternoon, this evening, depending on where you are in the world, might be thinking, this sounds great. You know, yes, of course, we should have a human development approach aligned with an approach to resource management that is fundamentally different from today. They might also, when they're thinking about that macroeconomic picture, think, well, actually, ultimately, economic success is still fundamentally judged by GDP at a national level, maybe profits, or even quarter by sales metrics at a company level. And things like the human development approach or the human development index, sorry, which are not, you know, those types of measurements have been around for a while, still don't get the traction or the energy, or don't seem to have the same influence on the big macro picture that you might think, considering how compelling they are when we talk about them like this. How do we begin to shift away from using GDP as the measure of success, or is that already happening in your view?
Yes, I mean the Human Development Index. I mean, it has been successful over the last decades, and these are not micro initiatives. This is actually UN and government led. So through looking at these indicators and countries reporting on these, and there have been improvements on many of these already. So it's not completely useless. That's why also I think as more governments move maybe in towards looking at circular economy strategies, there's the opportunity to align these two.
In my view, it has already started, Seb, because obviously the effect of the financial crisis in 2008 are still, we can still sense the effect today, but the mentalities have changed. People are changing, and you can see, even if the CEOs are not still moving full speed into circular economy, they expose themselves. And what's interesting is that they expose themselves to a distributed economic model where we recognize that resources could be renewable, energy could be renewable and accessible to anyone on the planet. So all of a sudden we move from a very centralized model to a completely decentralized distributed model, and that's built in the concept of circular economy. So all of a sudden these large concentrated organizations will have to adapt to local needs of local economies and the local needs of the people within these economies. So So it's starting. You see that in the financial world with blockchain, which is disruptive completely the financial institution. So these are the seeds that you plant, and you start to see the cracks. Obviously, we are in a very stormy period, so we have stormy leaders. But once we move away from that storm, there will be new foundations built in order to recreate the next ecosystem.
Well, thank you. I mean, that seems a fantastic note to end on, and we are out of time. So thank you so much both to Alex and Patrick for your contributions to this conversation, where it feels like we've covered an awful lot, talking about where does a human sit in when we start thinking about resource management differently, and how can we create a model that somehow combines and addresses those two big challenges highlighted in the recent climate report around social distribution, inequality, and also resource management, and how might we bring two quite promising areas of work together. And I think what I really take away from this conversation, especially from Alex and Patrick's comments and later in the conversation, are that this is already starting to happen, that we've had some success. The Human Development Index is something that's positively influencing change. The Sustainable Development Goals are this big vision that we're working towards, and obviously the circular economy as an idea has gained huge traction over the last few years. Thank you so much to the audience who joined us. Thank you for your questions and comments. They really sparked the conversation. We hope you'll join us again on future sessions. We've got a couple coming up today that I'll just quickly highlight. At 1 o'clock GMT, we're back with the circular economy and why and how we should measure it. We've got the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's very own Sven Herman and Roy Verkulen to talk about some approaches to measuring the circular economy. And then at 8 o'clock, we're going to space with the European Space Agency's Lucille Poulet, who will be talking about what can we learn. We'll talk about finite resources. What can we learn from space exploration when it comes to designing future businesses, future economies, and future products. Thank you so much again to everyone who attended, and thank you to Alex and Patrick. We hope to see you again on the DIF.